A few years ago, I found myself explaining to a Belgian exchange student Bonfire Night, or Guy Fawkes Night, a national festival celebrated here in Britain, or at least in England, Wales and Scotland. It was only when myself and a couple of British students came to explain this to our Belgian friend that we realised just how freaking weird Bonfire Night actually is. This is our only national festival. What are we doing? I should specify for clarity that while there are a lot of festivals around the world often known as Bonfire Night, in this video I am talking specifically about the British festival that takes place on or around the 5th of November and is also known as Guy Fawkes Night. Though some traditions I have come across around Bonfire Night actually go back a really long way and predate Guy Fawkes Night itself, in some cases by millennia. Hi, I'm Juliet. I'm a writer and an historian, and on my channel I cover myth, legend, folklore, ghost stories and weird and wonderful history in general. So today, the weird and wonderful history of Bonfire Night. Officially, Bonfire Night celebrates the failure of the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 to blow up the Houses of Parliament on the 5th of November of that year. King James VI of Scotland, who was a Calvinist, a Protestant, had become King James I of England when his first cousin twice removed, Queen Elizabeth I, died in 1603, and he was her heir. Disappointed that James continued the persecution of Roman Catholics despite his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, having been a Catholic, the Gunpowder Plot was an attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament with James in it by a group of Catholic conspirators. They were led by Robert Catesby, and about 13 people were involved to varying degrees. On the 4th of November 1605, an anonymous letter was sent to a Catholic member of Parliament called Lord Monteagle, warning him not to attend the state opening of Parliament the next day. A search was made of the buildings, and about midnight between the 4th and the 5th, they found one of the conspirators, Guy or Guido Fawkes, in the cellar with a lot of gunpowder. All but one of the conspirators were then either killed or arrested, and those who were arrested were taken to the Tower of London and tortured. This is something that we know partly from Guy Fawkes's signature on his confession, which is famously very wobbly and doesn't look like his signature looked before he was arrested, an indication of the physical torture he had undergone. Those conspirators who survived this process were tried for high treason on the 27th of January 1606, and they were sentenced to be hung, drawn and quartered. They were executed on the 30th and 31st of January 1606. Guy Fawkes was executed on the 31st. Shortly afterwards, Protestant Member of Parliament Sir Edward Montagu proposed a bill establishing an anniversary celebration of their escape. This was based on the ancient Hebrew traditions of celebrating days of deliverance, which is ironic because at the time, Jewish people were not even allowed to live in England. They had been banished from the country several years earlier in 1290 and were not allowed back in until 1656. However, Montagu's bill was very popular, it passed in 2 days, and it required everyone to attend church, that's Church of England Church, on the 5th of November for a special service, so it became a religious holiday initially. Nowadays, despite the fact that it originates in a conflict between Catholics and Protestants, there isn't really a religious element to Bonfire Night. When I was at university, I was in the Catholic Society, and we were the only Christian society that had our own bar, so we used to invite the other Christian societies, the Methodists and the Anglicans particularly, to come to the Catholic Society and burn a Catholic in effigy, because we would have a bonfire and we would burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes on the bonfire and have fireworks at the Catholic chaplaincy. So it really is pretty removed from its origins in a religious conflict today. Normally we do set off the fireworks in actual darkness. This year, because we have a young toddler, we went to a slightly earlier firework display and it was really kind of more twilight when they set off the fireworks. But generally speaking, we would set them off when it's actually dark. We do this on or around the 5th of November. There's usually a lot of firework displays on the weekends around the 5th of November because it's easier on a weekend. It's not a public holiday. As we'll see, the church service part got taken out, And although it's a very popular festival, we don't have a bank holiday for it or anything. So it's often on a school night. So this is one reason that a lot of people will go to firework displays on a Friday or a Saturday rather than on the 5th itself, whatever day that happens to be. There are also usually displays on the 5th itself as well. Generally speaking, the core ingredients of a Bonfire Night celebration are a bonfire and a firework display, and often you will get a guy burned on the bonfire, an effigy of Guy Fawkes. This is one of those things that I realised sounded really weird when I came to explain it. So, well, he was a terrorist who got caught, and he was hung, drawn and quartered, but we celebrate the fact he got caught by burning him on a bonfire. Which actually doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, and that's one of the things I'm going to try and trace the origins of in this video. And then the other element is the fireworks, and this is our only major firework display. We do fireworks on New Year's Eve as well, as is pretty common around the world, but we don't have any other major kind of fireworks holidays. And I know that my friends from Spain and from America are completely baffled by the fact that we do this in November. To me, a firework display is all about getting wrapped up against the cold, drinking a mulled wine or a hot chocolate, eating a nice warm burger or a hot dog or something. Or this year I ended up with pilau rice with spinach and chickpeas because I just decided I wanted to be healthy. Normally I have a cheeseburger, and I also had a Prosecco, which was less warming, but still nice. That's part of it, and usually Bonfire Night is the point where I break out the woolly hat and the scarf and the gloves. Especially, of course, if we're doing sparklers, which are also often a part of Bonfire Night. Public displays will also often have a fun fair, like the one we went to this year did. They'll sell lighty up toys and things for the kids. Here's me and my brother many years ago fighting with kind of lightsaber-like toys. And obviously how much there is will depend on the individual display. The one we went to this year didn't have a bonfire, which was a bit disappointing. They had fire dancers instead, but we skipped the fire dancers. But usually there is a bonfire, sometimes with the effigy of Guy Fawkes, sometimes without. And to me, that's what fireworks are all about, is wrapping up against the cold, warming yourself with some nice food and drink, and watching fireworks. And also, again, because it's a school night, doing it not all that late. So although 5 o'clock is unusually early, it is pretty common to have them 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, even if it's a Friday or a Saturday. When I went with my Spanish friend to Las Hogueras de San Juan, which is an annual festival for St. John in Alicante, where they also have fireworks and they also burn incredible works of art. They're made to be burnt. It's amazing. I'll do a video on it another day. But anyway, when I went to that one, that was at midnight, and we were having a picnic on the beach at midnight watching the fireworks because it was a public holiday, and also it was in June. When I went to America for the 4th of July, again, we did the fireworks, I don't know, 11, midnight. It was warm. It's a very different kind of thing. Whereas for us, when we do Guy Fawkes Night, we want the fireworks to be no later than about 9 o'clock because we all want to go home and go to bed. If you're not going to a big public display, then a lot of people will do fireworks at home. They'll just buy fireworks. You can't buy quite such big fireworks for home use in the UK as you can in America. So back garden fireworks will be much smaller than the ones at a public display. You might or might not build a bonfire or just light a fire in a little kind of fire bucket. Sparklers are a much bigger part of the at-home celebrations. You can take a sparkler to a big public one, but obviously if there's a lot of crowds everywhere, that's trickier and it might be forbidden depending on the choices of the organisation hosting the event. Bonfire Night has been celebrated this way for quite a while. My parents have slightly different memories of it growing up in the 1950s. In my mum's case, they didn't celebrate it because she is from Northern Ireland. Bonfire Night is celebrated in England, Scotland and Wales, but in Ireland they are not quite so keen on celebrating the failed plot to blow up King James. And in Northern Ireland, especially in the 60s when my mum was a teenager and into the 70s when she was an adult, that was during the Troubles. So you couldn't even buy fireworks. When she was younger, they used to get small table fireworks that you would do indoors on a table, and they might do some of those, but you're not going to get major celebrations of Bonfire Night in Northern Ireland. Catholics trying to blow up Protestants is not a cause for fun and games over there. My dad grew up in England, near London, and he remembers kids going around with a kind of guy effigy, like a scarecrow type thing, and asking for a penny for the guy. So he didn't do it so much himself, but he was aware of other people doing it. In Ireland, there's also less of a need for Bonfire Night because Halloween was continuously popular in Ireland. Halloween was more popular with Roman Catholics in England. If you are in the Republic of Ireland, then the population is majority Catholic. If you are Northern Ireland, it used to be about 75% Protestant, 25% Catholic. It's closing in on 50-50 now. But Roman Catholics have historically been more up for celebrating Halloween because Halloween is All Hallows' Eve. It is the eve of All Saints' Day, a Roman Catholic festival, which is the day before All Souls' Day. The Church of England has those as well, but non-Catholic denominations tend to be less keen on the veneration of saints than the Catholic Church. It's often seen as pagan by Protestant churches, whereas in the Catholic Church we don't worship saints, but Catholic theology involves praying to saints, asking for them to intercede with God on your behalf. So Halloween, All Saints' Day Eve, did continue to be celebrated in Ireland. It also, of course, has its origins in an Irish festival of Samhain, which is the pagan festival that predated All Hallows' Eve, and which shares some traditions and beliefs with Halloween as well. Halloween in England was not a very big thing when I was growing up. We knew about it. People might have a Halloween party, but it really wasn't much of a thing. There was a bit of trick-or-treating, but I never went trick-or-treating as a kid. Now it's much bigger. It's kind of come back across from America. I think it went from Ireland to America and it's made its way back to the UK now. I wonder if it's even going to take over from Bonfire Night a little bit as time goes on. But there are a few reasons that Bonfire Night has hung on in there in England, Scotland and Wales. The separate nations of England, Scotland and Wales have their own saints' days that are particular to each one. St David's in Wales, St Andrew in Scotland and St George in England. But those aren't really a big thing, especially in England. There really isn't much around St George's Day, and certainly none of them would bring all three of those nations together. So Bonfire Night, although not so much of a thing in Ireland and in Northern Ireland, does bring together the other three nations of the United Kingdom, and it is basically our only national festival. Possibly partly because the king who was saved was a king of both England and Scotland. Wales had been conquered several centuries before by England. That's one reason that everybody kind of hangs on in there. It's also a festival of light, functionally. It's as the year is getting darker, as we come toward the darkest time of year. Obviously, the darkest time of year is Christmas, but as we get into the darker, colder nights, it functions as that festival of light where we can celebrate and brighten things up with bonfires and fireworks. It often falls around the same sort of time as Diwali, so there's quite a few fireworks going on over a period of a couple of weeks, depending what date Diwali is each year. Bonfires have been part of celebrations around this time of year for centuries for that very reason. The Irish Samhain on the 1st of November and the Welsh Nos Calan Gaibh on the 31st of October, which are both obviously antecedents of Halloween, both involved bonfires, both as part of festivals which also featured spirits of the dead being able to come through, and you made a bonfire to protect from the darkness and also to burn waste from the harvest, because these are also coming kind of just after harvest time. Usually harvest festivals, in England anyway, tend to be in September, but of course the American and Canadian Thanksgivings are both harvest festivals as well. They happen at different times, in October and November. So harvest festivals can happen really any time through the autumn months, and that is part of the origins of Halloween as well. So then the Christian All Hallows' Eve, Halloween, took on the date and some aspects of those festivals, often including, in past years, the bonfire. There were also Norse pagan practices that sometimes included lighting need fires, but that was usually a response to a crisis like a plague rather than an annual tradition, with some exceptions. Obviously, in England, you've got Angles, Saxons and Jutes coming in, and then Normans, who were originally Vikings as well. And then you've got Celtic population in Cornwall, and then of course you've got Celtic populations in Wales and Scotland. So we're kind of looking to both Celtic and Norse traditions to see if we can find origins of some of these practices. Ronald Hutton and David Cressy have both expressed a lot of scepticism about this theory. They're not convinced by this interpretation that the Gunpowder Plot celebrations have their origins in these bonfire festivals at all. They both say that there is no evidence for late autumn or early winter bonfires in medieval or Tudor England, as opposed to North Wales, the Isle of Man and central Scotland, where Halloween bonfires were popular. And on that basis, they don't think that the celebration and survival of Bonfire Night has anything to do with the Celtic Halloween and previous pagan festivals. But I still think there's a connection. First of all, lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. This is a phrase often said by archaeologists. Just because we don't have evidence of something does not mean you can definitively say it didn't happen. Even if we assume that people were only lighting Halloween bonfires in Wales and Scotland, the Scottish king had just become the King of England, and it was him that was saved by the catching of the Gunpowder Plot. So it would make sense to me that an influence from central Scotland comes through in this English festival. Basically, it's hard to prove from the evidence we have because the source material isn't great for this period of history. But it seems pretty likely to me that this habit of lighting bonfires on Bonfire Night has at least something to do with the Halloween bonfires that were happening the week before in some parts of the UK, or we don't have the UK yet, but in some parts of the British Isles. The new festival of Gunpowder Treason Day, as it was originally known, having been created in the early 1600s, was also able to incorporate fireworks into the fanciest celebrations from the beginning. Fireworks were first used in England at the wedding of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York in 1486, and they became popular during the reign of Elizabeth I. Only the very richest and fanciest celebrations would have included fireworks, but they were becoming popular for elaborate celebrations in that period. So the fact that the celebration of Gunpowder Treason Day immediately incorporates fireworks is one of the reasons that it's hung on and continued to be celebrated. Another possible origin for the bonfire was Charles I, who reigned 1625 to 1647, had a Catholic wife called Henrietta Maria, to whom he was very devoted, and this kicked off a lot of renewed anti-Catholic sentiment. In some places in London during the reign of Charles I, effigies of the Pope or the Devil were burned, and this seems to be the origins of the Guy. Over time, instead of the Pope or the Devil, people start burning Guy Fawkes himself in effigy. Samuel Pepys wrote about the celebrations of Bonfire Night in his diary. He lived in London in the 1600s, and his diary is a fantastic resource for social and cultural history in this period. In 1660, he wrote, "This 5th day of November is observed exceeding well in the city, and at night great bonfires and fireworks." In 1664, he wrote, "To the Duke's house to see Macbeth, a pretty good play, but admirably acted. Thence home, the coach being forced to go round by London Wall home because of the bonfires, the day being mightily observed in the city." However, celebrations of Bonfire Night did take a knocking in 1666 because of the Great Fire of London, which burned from the 2nd to the 6th of September of 1666. So obviously in that year, people were not very keen on lighting bonfires or even setting off fireworks. Pepys wrote in his diary, "Home by coach, but met not one bonfire through the whole town in going round by the wall, which is strange, and speaks the melancholy disposition of the city at present, while never more was said of and feared of and done against the Papists than just at this time." So he's clearly associating Bonfire Night with anti-Catholic rhetoric and presumably burning of the Pope in effigy, but after the fire, that custom does take a hit. When the Catholic James II became King of England in 1695, the theme of the day shifted slightly from anti-Catholic rhetoric to anti-treason rhetoric, albeit with some underlying anti-Catholic feeling there as well. There was a ban on bonfires in the City of London to avoid burning effigies of the Pope, and presumably this is where we start to see a real shift to burning effigies of Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes is the best known of the conspirators because he was the one who was actually caught under the Houses of Parliament, even though their leader was Robert Catesby. So Guy Fawkes then becomes the figure being burned in effigy because the king is Catholic, so you can't burn the Pope. However, in 1689, the anti-Catholic rhetoric came back in full force when William III and Mary II took the throne. They were Protestant. But customs were changing. People started lighting up their windows instead of lighting bonfires. A contributor to the Gentleman's Magazine in 1751 urged that something should be done to stop the casting of fireworks into crowds and the breaking of windows and burning of fences by masked revellers. The Times reported in 1788 that Guy Faux, spelled like the French word for false, in his usual state was carried about the streets in commemoration of the Gunpowder Plot. In 1790 it mentioned boys begging for money to burn Guy Faux. So by the late 1700s we can see the festival as it was celebrated in the 20th century is really coming into being. It's Guy Fawkes or Guy Faux who's being burned in effigy rather than the Pope. Fireworks are still very much part of it, and children or boys are starting to go around begging for money for the guy. Through the 19th century, Bonfire Night did start to fade a little bit, and there were a lot of other festivals and days and holidays and various commemorations that used to happen in the early modern period, most of which was slowly dropped, and at one point it looked like Bonfire Night might go with them. In the early 19th century it was still pretty much a religious festival. Thomas Thistleton Dyer, in his book British Popular Customs Present and Past, which he published in 1875, had quoted an earlier book called Fragmenta Antiquitatis, which was from 1815, where he says Blount gives the following account of a custom observed at Doncaster. At this place, on the 5th of November, yearly, whether it happens on a Sunday or any other day in the week, the town waits play for some time on the top of the church steeple at the time when the congregation are coming out of the church from morning service, to the tune of God Save the King. This has been done for 80 years at least, and very possibly ever since the 5th of November has been a festival, except that formerly the tune played was Britain's Strike Home. God Save the King, of course, had not been written in 1605. The waits always receive from the churchwardens 6pence apiece for this service. So clearly in Doncaster in the early 19th century it was very much a national and also church festival. But the church part of the celebration of Bonfire Night was dropped in the mid-19th century. In 1850 the Pope appointed a full hierarchy of archbishops and bishops for the Roman Catholic Church in England. That did not get rid of anti-Catholic sentiment, and there was a record number of guys and fires around London that year, towards which the police showed an unusual tolerance. At Northampton, Towcester and Kettering, crowds demonstrated against Catholicism again through the next few years, and Tories and Anglicans encouraged a repetition of this, with Whigs and Dissenters as targets. So Anglicans, that's members of the Church of England. Tories are the political party that is now the Conservative Party. The Whigs were their opposing political party that doesn't really exist anymore, and Dissenters would be Protestants of other denominations. By 1856 there had been so much violence and crime that the local elite set the police on the revellers. So in the summer of 1858, Earl Stanhope moved that the Queen be formally requested to abolish the forms of prayer prescribed for the day, on the grounds that they were politically obsolete and grossly unfair to Catholics, and Queen Victoria agreed. So at that point, Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes Day, Gunpowder Treason Day ceased to be a festival of the Church of England, and it became essentially completely secular, albeit still anti-Catholic. Thistleton Dyer gives us in his 1875 book, "The 5th of November is not observed by the populace with nearly so much festive diversion as in former times. Originally, the burning of Guy Fawkes in effigy was a ceremony much in vogue, especially among the lower classes, but it is now confined chiefly to schoolboys, and even with them it is not so popular as in days gone by. Formerly, the burning of a good guy was a scene of uproar perhaps unknown to the present day." So clearly the festival had continued to be quite popular through the early part of the 19th century, but was starting to fade. It's also clear that it is continuing to be popular, particularly among children. And there are other individual local customs that seem to have been carried out around Guy Fawkes Night. Another one mentioned by Thistleton Dyer: "At Marlborough the rustics have the following peculiar custom at their bonfires. They form themselves into a ring of some dozen or more round the bonfire and follow each other round it, holding thick club sticks over their shoulders, while a few others, standing at distances outside this moving ring with the same sort of sticks, beat those which the men hold over their shoulders, as they pass round in succession, all shouting and screaming loudly. This might last half an hour at a time and be continued at intervals till the fire died out." That sounds like it might originate in Morris dancing, which is English traditional folk dancing. Not something I have looked into much yet, but it does involve hitting sticks on other sticks. That's frequently a part of Morris dancing. So presumably that tradition came from Morris dancing somehow. But it is becoming increasingly associated with children as the 19th century goes on. Thistleton Dyer says, "At Purton, the boys for several weeks before the 5th of November used to go from house to house begging faggots for the bonfire, in the middle of which was burnt the effigy of Guy Fawkes. Following rhyme was sung on the occasion. My brave lads remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. We will drink, smoke and sing, boys, and our bells they shall ring, boys, and here's health to our king, boys, for he shall not be forgot. There are a lot of variations of this rhyme, but it is still around. My dad taught me this rhyme when I was a kid, and the version that he taught me was remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. So obviously one way it stayed in the cultural memory is through these rhymes. There's so many tiny little different variations, but certainly that rhyme was still current in London in the 50s, and I was taught it in Kent in the 80s. So various versions of it are still going around, even if nowadays a lot of people might only do the first couple lines, remember, remember the 5th of November, maybe say gunpowder, treason and plot. As we move into the 20th century, this continues to be the case, and children going around asking for a penny for the guy continues. So even as adults maybe didn't celebrate it quite so much for a period in the late 19th and early 20th century, children kept it going. Here we can see a picture of William Godber dressed up for Guy Fawkes Day sitting in a wheelbarrow, a photo taken by his father Albert Percy Godber in the 1900s. And as you can see, it says, with the compliments of the guy. It's a terrifying picture. That mask and that pointy hat is going to haunt my dreams. The pointy hat obviously has nothing whatsoever to do with the clan or anything. It is probably an imitation of a Catholic bishop's mitre. But the festival then became more popular again through the 20th century. It adapted to the increased mass production of consumer goods and also community events that were increasingly moving toward family celebrations. Although we do have big community fireworks celebrations, it's also very common to celebrate Fireworks Night in the home with your own collection of fireworks and maybe your own small bonfire. And the fact that people were doing that is one of the things that kept it going, even if public organisations weren't doing anything big for a while. By 1908, the Payne Company alone was selling 500 tonnes of fireworks annually, and back garden fireworks parties were becoming more and more popular. By the 1920s, groups of children were going about wealthier homes asking for pennies to buy commercially produced fireworks. They might still be saying penny for the guy, but they're using it to buy fireworks, or they might outright ask for fireworks. Bonfires survived as focal points for the parties, and obviously it's November. It's cold. So if you are having an outdoor party in your home in November, it makes sense to have some form of bonfire, especially in the days before heated lighting. Effigy burning became a general burning of a figure in human clothes, still loosely called a guy, and some people think this is actually where the term guy comes from. The use of the word guy to mean a male person in general, it actually quite possibly comes from the guy that gets burnt on the bonfire, which then comes to mean just a male figure. We can also see here the Ellesmere Scouts and Cubs torchlight procession and Scouts bonfire at Whitchurch to celebrate Guy Fawkes Night from 1947. So even if you don't get massive public displays, groups like the Scouts are still doing celebrations, partly because, of course, the Scouts are very into fire building and fire safety and all that stuff that Forest School does now. It makes sense that the Scouts would keep up with Bonfire Night. Bigger public fireworks displays became popular again from the 1980s. So I don't remember a time that they weren't popular because I was born in the 1980s. So certainly for all of my life, big public fireworks displays and bonfires have been a popular thing, although when I was younger we tended to do them in our garden because, you know, me and my brother were small children and that can be easier when you have small children. I also have friends who have fireworks parties where they'll invite people over every year to do fireworks together. Another reason for its popularity in the 80s was people started burning effigies of the very divisive Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Which is ironic because the whole point of Bonfire Night is that the King and Parliament were saved from somebody blowing them up. And I have to mention one more tradition. Now this I don't think is a continuous tradition. I think this is something that has been brought back in the 20th century. But when I went to Oxford for a public Bonfire Night display some years ago, they had a bonfire, but they also had this giant human-shaped corn dolly type thing that they set on fire as the guy. Now that sounds like a druid form of human sacrifice from pre-Roman times. Now, obviously, they did not sacrifice a human. It was just an effigy. And I don't necessarily think that this is a continuous tradition. It's possible that it's something somebody got an idea for from the 1973 film The Wicker Man, which is itself inspired by the history. But Julius Caesar, in his Gallic Wars from the 1st century BC, tells us The nation of all the Gauls, this is obviously Celtic peoples related to the British, is extremely devoted to superstitious rites. And on that account, they who are troubled with unusually severe diseases and they who are engaged in battles and dangers either sacrifice men as victims or vow that they will sacrifice them. And they employ the Druids as the performers of those sacrifices, because they think that unless the life of a man be offered for the life of a man, the mind of the immortal gods cannot be rendered propitious, and they have sacrifices of that kind ordained for national purposes. Others have figures of vast size, the limbs of which, formed of osiers, they fill with living men, which being set on fire, the men perish enveloped in the flames. They consider that the oblation of such as have been taken in theft or in robbery or any other offence is more acceptable to the immortal gods, but when a supply of that class is wanting, they have recourse to the oblation of even the innocent. So this form of druid human sacrifice by burning people alive in a giant effigy of a person obviously inspired the 1973 film The Wicker Man and its more recent remake, and I don't know if the public displays in Oxford still do this. It was a while ago that I went. I don't know when they started doing it. I don't know if it's got more to do with the Harvest Festival aspect and it is basically a giant corn dolly, but I just found it fascinating because I wasn't expecting it, and we're at this big public firework display and I'm looking up and I'm going, did we walk into the Wicker Man? Why are they burning this enormous figure of a man? Usually a guy, for Guy Fawkes, is more of a scarecrow-sized, human-sized figure on top of a bonfire. And that's a really interesting example of how long-lived traditions can be, and maybe they fall out for a while, but they come back in. Going back to that issue of the bonfires, and are they connected with Halloween, and Hutton and Cressy saying, well, no, because there's no evidence that people were doing that at Halloween in that period. Well, maybe not, but they were earlier for the pagan festivals, if not for Halloween. So sometimes traditions can be rediscovered, and especially if there is a text that helps people to do so. So The Wicker Man is inspired by the history, as recounted by Julius Caesar, and then the film potentially inspires people to bring that into the Guy Fawkes celebrations. How come this festival has survived when there were loads of others that didn't? We used to have Restoration Day after the restoration of the monarchy, following that brief period we were a republic. We have royal birthdays. We used to have all sorts of random public celebrations. In 1775, November alone had 13 state anniversaries, and they've all dropped off. We still do I was going to say the Queen's birthday. It's the King's official birthday now. We still do it. Remembrance Day obviously started after World War I, and that's a major ceremony, also at the beginning of November, immediately following on from Bonfire Night. We really don't have very much. Remembrance Day is a very solemn day to commemorate the dead in wars. We don't have an equivalent of the American Veterans Day, where current and former living serving members are thanked. We only have the commemoration of the dead, which is the one on the 11th of November. And the only other major festivals are Christian festivals, which is Christmas and Easter. And then we have a few bank holidays, which used to be folk festivals, but there's very little left anymore. You might get some dancing around the maypole on May Day, but that's basically it. They're just bank holidays now. For all that Hutton and Cressy poo-poo it, I think the connection with ancient bonfire festivals, and especially Bonfire Night's general function as a festival of light at a dark time of year, is a really major part of why it's survived so long. And it brought in the fireworks. It's our fireworks festival, and people don't want to get rid of the fun fireworks festival. It was also kept going by children, because even Easter isn't really that big a deal over here. We have a 4-day weekend. If you are religious, then you spend a lot of time in church, having, attended Catholic church until very recently, and now I attend Anglican church. Easter involved a lot of time in church. But if you're not religious, Easter is pretty much just a long weekend and some chocolate eggs in Britain. It's not a particularly big celebration. We don't have as many traditions around Easter as, for example, America does. Our only other really major festival is Christmas. And of course, Christmas, whether you celebrate it as a Christian, as a religious festival, or whether it's the holiday season, is about children. It's something that we do for children, and we keep the traditions going for children, and children get excited about it. Halloween is becoming more popular, again, partly for children. It's children that we take trick-or-treating, and that is becoming more and more popular now in England. And I'm wondering if that's partly how Bonfire Night kept going, because as our somewhat miserable, stiff-upper-lipped British ancestors decided they were going to drop all the fun festivals and parties, the only ones that kept going were the ones that were central for children. Children kept asking for a penny for the guy and burning the guy on the bonfire. The Scouts kept up Guy Fawkes celebrations, and that has kept it going when everything else fell away. Halloween does seem to be taking over a tiny bit now, and this year, especially because of where the days of the week fell, a lot of Bonfire Night celebrations have got smushed into the same sort of weekend as a lot of Halloween stuff, because Halloween was Thursday and Bonfire Night's the next Tuesday. And I love Halloween and I love taking my son trick-or-treating, but I do hope it doesn't take over Bonfire Night altogether, because as weird as it is as a festival, it's our weird festival, and I like it, and I hope it continues for many years to come. Thank you so much for watching. Please do drop the video a like if you enjoyed it. It really helps boost it in the algorithm. And if you'd like to support the channel, buy my book, Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome, which is available on Amazon, ebook or paperback. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is completely free to you to read on Kindle Unlimited if you have that subscription. 13 ghost stories from ancient Roman texts retold in a modern way. Or if you're doing some Christmas shopping early, pick it up as a gift for anyone who likes spooky stories over the Christmas season. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
Say hello to